It's February. I've got my bushcraft gear with me. I'm bushcrafting in February. Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always, a huge thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, The Bushcraft Padawan. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know by now that when I come out to do these all dayers, rather than just come out and wandering around and pottering around, bumping into trees, I like to come out with a list of things that I want to do to try and achieve. And again, February is no exception at all. So in no particular order, I want to experiment today with using pine resin as a fire starter. I then want to further that little test that I did back in January. I'm linking to it in the top right hand corner of your screen. I tried using pine cones as a fuel in my wood gas stove and it just didn't work. The pine cones they were soaking wet. They didn't burn like I thought they might because of the high, or what I consider to be the high resin content. They didn't burn. They've been at home in the conservatory off the ground in the sunshine for about a month now, so I think they're as dry as they're going to get really. So I want to experiment with them again. I don't want to give up on them. Last month, the variable of dampness, which of course is always a big challenge when you're trying to start a fire, that was there. I think that's greatly diminished today. So I don't want to give up on pine cones as a fuel source. I want to try them today, but I want to try pine resin as a fire, something to catch a spark, and then take that to flame and add the pine cones to it. Once I've done that, I'm going to make a simple hot chocolate. There's no cooking today. I've already eaten, so no cooking involved. The thing that I really do want to focus on today, and I always do this when I come and do my all dayers, but I never do it overtly in front of camera, is I want to focus on my tree and plant identification. Regular viewers will know, and again I'm linking up in the top right hand corner of the screen, that I've been doing now for just over 2 years a tree and plant identification masterclass. Now I'm starting my 3rd year. I've actually decided to kind of upgrade, and I'm doing the continuation studies that Paul Kirtley and Frontier Bushcraft have laid on it. It takes the basic concepts, and I use the word basic very broadly because I still struggle with some of it, but it takes that baseline content and it expands upon that. What I've been really mindful of it, and I've said this in past videos, I flock towards the tree ID. I gravitate towards that. I'm looking up or out. I rarely look down at the plants that I'm passing by, and I'm acutely aware of that. So this is my challenge today. I want to identify 5 trees. I've already identified a few on the walk in, to be honest, but more importantly, I want to have a go at identifying 5 plants. As easy or as tricky, whatever I happen to stumble across. I'm looking down at the ground now and there's a tricky one down there, so I might avoid that one. But 5 trees and 5 plants, and I want to try and do that on camera as well. So not perhaps the most interesting video that I've ever done, but if you're interested in UK trees and plants, maybe there'll be something in here for you. So first things first, let's get a brew down my neck. Here we go, I've got all my gear laid out, nice sensible order, close to the stove down here. I've got the small pot here, feels like I'm doing an O group here, models, ground in general, ground in detail. Anyway, got a little pot of pine resin there, got a pile of birch bark here, and then I've got my cones across here. So working from left to right and then dropping them into the stove at the bottom. Let's see how we get on with those drier pine cones than last time. We have a burn. let me tell you, it's a warm one today. It's the latter half of February here in the UK, and you can probably get a sense of the blue skies around me, which doesn't always mean to say it's warm. But I've ditched my jacket, I've got my sort of thermal leafer top, and I've rolled the sleeves up, and even now I feel too hot. I wish I'd worn my much lighter summer shirt. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful day here in the UK, hopefully the start of spring. Behind me, that water is bubbling away there on top of the pine cones. Comes as no real surprise. Those pine cones are doing a cracking job of burning, as I would hoped they would have done back in January, but clearly they were damp. They don't burn as well when damp as they do when they are dry, unlike birch twigs and birch bark, which clearly still burn very well even when they're damp. Doesn't appear to be the case for pine cones, but that's no big deal. At least now I know that when they are on the ground, when it has been dry, when they are open or the conditions allow, they are a good source of fuel. And of course, you rarely just find one or two pine cones on the ground, do you? You normally find masses of them because you're normally in an area where they're falling from multiple trees. So a reliable fuel source as long as they're in the right condition, and in my experience always a plentiful fuel source as well. So I'm glad I came back out today and reattempted that. Glad I didn't give up back in January when the conditions weren't right for using that type of fuel. That'll do for me. Oh yeah, there she blows. So that's the that's the easy part out of the way. Getting a fire going with pine cones on the wood gas stove, making myself a hot chocolate, job done. Now comes the trickier part, which is why I've put it off until the second half of the video. Going out and doing some tree and plant ID. My intention is to ID the trees purely from memory, from what I've learned over the past couple of years doing this online masterclass. If I can identify any plants from memory, I'm going to, but as I've already said, it is my weaker spot, so I've brought out my Collins Guide to British Wildflowers, and I've also tabbed the pages there with the plants that are highlighted and dealt with during the Tree and Plant ID Masterclass. That doesn't of course mean that I won't see another plant that isn't tagged here because it's not widespread, it's not common, it's not useful, which are the categories or the filtering that the course applies to tree and plants, but it's a starting point at least. I'm hoping I can see some plants that I can identify just from memory. I already know what they would be, I just need to be able to find them, and if I can't, then I shall delve a little bit deeper into the old grey matter and use my book. But for now, I've got a hot chocolate waiting for me, so if you'll excuse me, I'll be back real soon. I thought I would tackle the thorny subject of plant ID first. Thorny? Get it? Thorny? Anyway, this is, I believe, this is gorse, Ulex europaeus or Ilex europaeus, Ulex europaeus, I think. This is gorse. Its habitat is wide open heathy grassland, which is exactly where I am. I've encountered this in the past. I haven't got a clue what bushcraft use it has, to be perfectly honest. Doesn't mean to say it doesn't have one. I suspect when it's dead and standing it will burn just as well as anything else, but I don't know of any particular use. I'm familiar with this because it's incredibly, I mean, it's covered in thorns. It's just a mass of thorns. I'm familiar with this because back in the day when I did a course in the army, the All Arms Commando course, I was, there's an area called Woodbury Common, and it's covered in this damn stuff, and of course you're running and diving and crawling through it, so I'm all too familiar with this. What I wasn't familiar with was this. I've just read in my plant ID book that the petals, the leaves, the flowers, sniff them, sniff, smell them, smell my cheese, that the flowers smell of coconut. Now I must admit, whenever I read in these plant ID books, these tree ID books, that the crushed leaves smell of this and they smell of that and they smell of the other, I'll be really honest, it just smells of generic green stuff to me. However, this stuff really does smell of coconut. Bizarrely, it really does. And that's not, I know you can't smell it, but trust me, take my word for it, it really does smell of coconut, which is bizarre and wonderful in equal measure. So there's one of the 5 ticked off the list. Gorse, at least I think it is. First up from the tree perspective is this. I believe this is a sycamore, Acer pseudoplatanus. And my key recognition feature for this, key ID feature, is that spear-tipped, green, scale, lizard-like bud that's emerging there. Fairly distinctive and simple to ID from. Hidden amongst the undergrowth, I was walking from the open area that I am into the woods. I spotted this. It stood out quite starkly because it's the only green thing that's in this otherwise quite brown background. I think I've stumbled upon something from the Apiaceae family here. What's giving it away to me is the leaves. If I can get a little closer, they have that very carrot leaf type of structure and appearance to them. I think this is a hemlock, and what makes me think that is, if I just get in focus here. Let me just zoom out. Hopefully you can see the stem there that I'm moving around. Very, very dark purple, blotchy coloured stem, which according to my memory and just backed up by the ID book would suggest that is hemlock. I'm not 100%, so clearly I'm going to put it nowhere near my mouth. I'm going to be very careful with my hands after I've handled it, but I am almost convinced it is a member of the Apiaceae family. What I'm less convinced about is what it actually is, but what I do know, what this course has taught me, is that there are some significantly nasty members of the Apiaceae family, as well as some non-harmful, but the fact that there are some means I'm going to be extra cautious around this. Aha! Just as I was about to stand up from talking about what I previously said I thought was hemlock, I've just noticed this that you can see in the centre of the screen now. Tiny little example of it just tucked away, and to me it just demonstrates that need or that requirement to actually sort of ultra focus, ultra look down. I would never have seen this if I'd just been walking. It simply isn't at that time of life yet for it to have taken over, but I'm pretty certain that what I've got here is an example of sticky willies, or Gallium aperine to give it its scientific name. Just before I switched the camera on, I took a little sample of this and stuck it on my thermal top that I'm wearing, and it stuck to it. So yes, good confirmation that this is sticky willies. Decent bushcraft use. I've just been listening to a video from Paul Kirtley on this. Some great foraging uses. Steamed or blanched in hot water removes those tiny little hook hairs, or reduces the stickiness of them, the spikiness of them, and a decent salad green or a decent accompaniment. So yeah, some decent foraging purpose behind this one. I'm far more confident over this being Gallium aperine sticky willies than I was over the previous one being hemlock. But even having said that, I'm still staying away from the potential hemlock that I've just ID'd. Sticky willies, Gallium aperine. The tree directly behind me, the one that appears to be coming up the top of my head there, just stopped me in my tracks for a second there, because as I was walking past, it had these huge buds to it that looked familiar. They looked like the buds of a horse chestnut. But I thought to myself, this tree just doesn't lend itself to looking like a horse chestnut. The horse chestnuts I've seen have been in urban areas, normally in parks or roads and things like that. They've always been quite small and squat and stocky. This tree's huge. It just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. it doesn't look like from the form of the tree or at a distance that it would be a horse chestnut. However, when I got up closer to it, took a look at the buds, they were large, brown, sticky to the touch. I looked just behind the bud on the shoot and there was that familiar and telling kind of horseshoe shape on the actual twig stem itself. All of it leans towards it being a horse chestnut. It just doesn't look like, at a distance, horse chestnuts that I've seen that have always been quite short and squat and stocky in appearance. This is anything but that. It's long and tall and slender and magnificent, not unlike myself. Aha, I was just packing my gear away from recording what I think was that horse chestnut we've just seen, and I've seen this bad boy lurking there amongst the carpet of bluebells. I'm fairly certain that this is an arum maculatum. I'm basing that on the fact that all the leaves are coming up from one stem below. They've got that arrowhead appearance to them. The ones that are not quite there yet are still filled up fairly tight. So I'm fairly certain that that is a lords and ladies or cuckoo pint or arum maculatum, to give it its scientific name. One to watch out for, if indeed that is an arum maculatum. The berries, and probably other parts, most definitely the berries, are quite poisonous, quite harmful, toxic in nature. Definitely one not to be messed about with. And in summer months, that will look like a relatively taller plant with almost miniature cherry tomato or red jelly bean type fruits hanging from it. Very appealing to look at. Very dangerous as well. Lords and ladies, arum maculatum, I think. Just wandering past this tree behind me, and just at the corner of my eye I saw the familiar buds of ash. There we go. There we go, those familiar ash buds there. Black, charcoal-like, ashen-like, if you like. However, I then looked at the tree and thought, that's not an ash tree. Why? Because this had actually fallen off a much larger tree next to it. It had fallen into the tree that I'm standing in front of. So if I'd based it solely upon that, I'd have been wholly wrong. As it was, it would have been a pretty hard mistake to make, because if I move, you can immediately see that what I think is quite an easy recognition feature, and that is of the elder tree, Sambucus nigra. Yes, there are, you can use the buds to identify this, you can use the leaves, but every time I look at this tree, even young samples, it looks old, it looks knackered, it looks weather-beaten and lived in. Elder, old, weather-beaten, elder. Anyway, that's how I kind of remember it in my head. So yeah, just the general look of this tree looks old. That's how I remember it, as being an elder tree, Sambucus nigra. Front and centre on the screen then, I'm fairly certain this is ivy or Hedera helix, growing up a massive ash tree. It's huge. I mean, I can't even see the buds at the top of it. I've had to rely on a couple of offshoots at the side to get the ID. But focusing on what's growing up it, Hedera helix ivy. It's probably important to note here that whilst the leaf and the leaf stem is clearly the obvious thing, if I just move the camera around slightly, this here, that there is actually the ivy stem, or trunk, I guess you could call it. Not sure what the correct term is. It actually looks, to all intents and purposes, quite camouflaged. Actually looks like it's part of the tree that it's growing up, but it actually isn't. It's the stem, it's the trunk, whatever the phrase is, of the ivy itself, the Hedera helix. I make no apologies for the corny sunset shot behind me. It was too good an opportunity to miss. Here we are, we're at the end of the video. I didn't cover off 5 trees, but to be perfectly honest, that wasn't my onus, that wasn't my emphasis. It was on the plant, and I'm pleased that I took the time today to attempt to ID, I won't say ID, but attempt to ID 5 plants. Did I get them right or wrong? Let me know in the comments below. It's probably worth saying, but hopefully everybody watches this realises this anyway. I am a novice, a newbie, a student in the area of tree and plant ID. So when I start to talk about plants and what is poisonous and what isn't, and what can be foraged for food and what can't, take that in the sincerity that it's offered, but take it with a big dose of salt as well, because I am a novice in this area. I wouldn't go on camera and say something that I knew was wrong or that I thought was wrong, because I don't want to make myself look a bigger fool than I normally do, but clearly we're all human and I am a novice in this area, so take it with a pinch of salt. If I did get it wrong, let me know what I got wrong in the comments below. That would be appreciated. Thank you. We've reached the end of another video. Thank you as always for watching. If you're a subscriber, pay attention to my subscriber count at the moment. We're approaching something, aren't we? Which means, because I've changed the way that I do my giveaways, you might want to start thinking about commenting on some of my upcoming videos. I'm saying no more than that, but just remember, I have changed the way I do my giveaways. If you're not a subscriber, why on earth not? Why not click in that button in the bottom right hand corner of your screen and see what happens? Anything else to cover off? Like, share, all of the usual stuff at the end of the video, and I'll see you in my next video very, very shortly. Just one final thing, just out of interest if you're still sticking around. Sunset behind me, the town that is in this low ground here, that's where I live, down there. Half a mile in that direction is the English Channel, it's the bottom of England. Half a mile in that direction is the edge of the South Downs. So I'm very fortunate to live in an area that I have so much outside on my doorstep. The only thing I'm missing are the mountains. I do miss getting up some decent peaks and some decent mountains, but you can't have everything, can you? Thanks as always for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.